Every time I listen to it, that song both makes me want to cry and brings me much joy. And I feel like that's been this week. Like, what a week. For most of it, I was incapable of anything but the bare minimum. Food on the table, keeping everyone mostly clean, being on the calls I needed to be on, writing what absolutely needed to be written. And other than that, it was mainly a constant intake of MSNBC, cheese, and Halloween candy. And then yesterday morning, I struggled with what to say today. There are so many things to say. But today I want to speak honestly about where we are as a nation. Next week, we will talk about what comes next. But today I want to honor this moment we find ourselves in. I was in the middle of the UU Faith Action New Jersey Issues Conference, a meeting of social justice advocates across New Jersey, yesterday morning when my mom knocked on the door to let me know that Pennsylvania had been called for Joe Biden. The electoral votes now numbered over that magic 270. If I'm honest with you, I felt next to nothing in that moment. I'd been glued to the television, stressing and anxious for days, and then it happened, and I kind of felt numb, still worried, not that much better. We went about our day. We saw friends out on the soccer field and in the courtyard, and some of them felt jubilant, and others felt what I was feeling: hesitation, ongoing fear, a little bit of suspicion. And then last night at 8:30, I watched Kamala Harris march out onto the stage, Mary J. Blige playing, and that was when the joy hit me. That is when I finally took a deep breath. That is when I finally shed some tears, knowing that a woman whose parents were Jamaican and Indian immigrants, is now the vice president-elect. The significance of that alone finally hit me. And I could feel joy bubbling up and tears and smiles and a measure of relief. Relief not only that a Black and Asian woman has finally made it to this seat of power, but relief that we have staved off the attempt at tyranny that has been building the last 4 years. And that in the White House will be people of decency, vision, and commitment. Over the past months, I have not been alone in my worry that our democracy was being eroded so that an authoritarian oligarchical takeover could begin, or perhaps more properly, could continue and come to fruition. And so, yes, there is immense relief that our systems and processes have withstood this current test, that in this moment they have stayed strong, and that the majority of our leaders have stayed true to our principles of fair and free elections. For today, the foundation held and the institutions stand, and that is a relief that cannot be overstated. We've been pulled back from the cliff of fascism. The American experiment is not dead. But there are other pieces to this. It's no secret to you all that I have been appalled at, frightened of, at times despondent about the last 4 years in this country. These past 4 years brought to undeniable light, animated, and gave support to the longtime sins of this nation: racism, misogyny, xenophobia, and overemphasis on individualism and a devaluation of community principles, fear and violence, and so much greed. These symptoms that have been so on display in our country for the last 4 years are not new things. Any Indigenous person or person of color will tell you these are not new. You may remember that on the Sunday before Indigenous Peoples Day, we read Langston Hughes's poem, "Let America Be America Again." I come back to that poem over and over in my mind and in my heart when I question what it means to be a patriot in this country. This country has never lived up to its ideals, and the last 4 years exposed and validated the always present, sometimes more quiet and sometimes more roaring, oppression and prejudice baked into this nation. These 4 years have been really hard. And the last nearly 10 months have been even harder. The deaths of Black men and women lay heavy on our hearts. The oppression and violence against trans folks weighs heavy on our hearts. Separation of children and their families make our hearts ache. The COVID losses cut so deep. Not a person across this nation will have escaped the pain of this pandemic. Our economic anxieties cause us to lose sleep, and our worry over the children makes us anxious. And all along, the endless tweets have pulled focus from the actual work of this country. And so today we rest just a touch easier knowing that the highest offices in the land will once again be filled with people who share those burdens with us. We know now that efforts will be made to help us. Van Jones said it so eloquently and vulnerably and openly on CNN. If you did not see him, Google it, please, and watch the clip. He lets his own tears flow as he shares how it feels to know that we will wake up in an America where once again, character matters, truth matters. He talks about what it'll mean to wake up and not have to worry as much about the safety of his children and his other beloveds. And so our tears are warranted and the celebration in the streets is warranted. Pride is warranted. A renewed sense of hope is warranted, because what a joy it will be to have leadership that condemns white supremacy, that works for women's rights, that believes children belong with their families. I feel such joy at the prospect of leadership that truly leads and helps us move in the direction of compassion and empathy. James Clyburn, the senator from South Carolina, said last night, and I paraphrase somewhat, "This is not a perfect country. It never will be. But our pursuit is ever for a more perfect union." And what joy that the desire to create a more perfect union will once again be the directive and desire of our leadership. So it's good to feel the joy, and I do, I promise, I really, really do. And Van Jones's words helped drive home for me why so many felt joy and relief of the kind that brought them in the streets, singing and dancing and praying. For so many, their very lives will be safer. There's a reason that around the world, commentators said it felt as if America had overthrown a dictator, that faith in the American experiment had been restored. But there's also a reason that my joy came slowly and only burst when Vice President-elect Harris came onto the stage. And there's a reason why it has been tempered. I have been finding hope somewhat hard to find, and I'm not trying to be a wet blanket. There's a lot to be grateful for, but there's another reality that has been exposed this week. There are still over 70 days to go. And if the last bunch of days is any measure, there will be trouble between now and Inauguration Day. We have to prepare for that, and that tempers my joy. I have faith that we can handle it, but still it worries me. Even more, what worries me is that too many people, way too many people, felt that the last 4 years were okay. Over 70 million people voted for the incumbent president and all that he represents. And most of them were white. More white women this time around voted for the incumbent than voted for him last time. And those statistics, while unsurprising to Indigenous folks and people of color, still break my heart a little bit. I realize there are complex forces at work here. There's corporate greed, there's the propaganda of power-hungry folks, the systemic degrading of our educational systems and notions of objective truth. But the reality is that for far too many people, for whatever reason, the last 4 years were okay and they wanted more. That's a validation, not a repudiation of America's sins. In his speech last night, President-elect Biden spoke to a vision of unity, a vision of moving forward together. That's his job. He now has to be president for all of us. But I'm struggling with what it means that so many voted for the worst of what America has always been. I'm still struggling with how to talk to people whose moral stance and position is so diametrically opposed to mine. I cast my vote, as I know you did, not with thought of what is best for me, but with thought of what is best for us all. What raises up those who've been kept down, what opens arms and doors for those who've been kept out, what focuses on community and love and empathy, what betters this world for all of us, not just me. And though it is President-elect Biden's job to bring us all together, maybe I don't want to be brought together just yet. And maybe I don't even know what it means. In a conversation earlier this week with a colleague, we talked about this very question, how we face such a divided country. And I assume this is what people will be talking about for months, if not years to come. And my colleague and I talked about how we bring our theology to bear on this question. We're ministers, it's what we do. Whether you term it the inherent worth and dignity of all people, or the spark of the divine in all people, or the light of life and being, many of us, if not all, believe that we humans participate in something larger than ourselves, that we carry within us potential, holiness, something good. And I've been struggling with what that means. If someone is okay with violence and division and hatred and racism, what does that mean? What am I called to do? How can I reconcile it with my belief that the holy moves through them? I suspect some of you have been asking yourselves these questions, and I have no answer. I just offer you where I am right now. And right now, I don't actually think we have to reconcile anything. The holy can be real and present in all people, and still we are humans who will sin, who will hide that holiness as best we can. I remember sharing with you all a year or more ago that I really do believe in sin, not as something the devil tempts us to, but as the real consequence of human choices, of human free will, of choices both individual and collective. I believe that our deepest human sin occurs when we draw lines between ourselves and others, creating division, oppression, harming others. We sin when we don't see the holy in ourselves or in each other, and then we deny and push away our unity, our spark, our mutual needs, our shared future. We sin when we push away the love that weaves through existence. I was reminded anew this week that I can believe that spark exists in someone else, and I can absolutely condemn their denial of it in me, or their denial of it in others, or their denial of it in themselves. I don't need to reconcile myself to racists, to anti-trans folks, to misogynists. There's a line, and it's actually okay, necessary, healthy, and even a sacred act to hold that line and to hold people responsible for their behavior and their choices. I don't have to make nice with people who would rather see my beloveds harmed. And yet, my theology also teaches me about the possibility of redemption. Because no matter how hard we humans try to build walls and separate each other and deny the sacredness in each other, the spark doesn't die. And maybe in this life, or maybe not, that spark can always be cultivated once again. I absolutely believe this. Just as I believe that reaching the promised land of justice and liberation is possible, even if I won't personally get there. So right now, today, in my fear and joy and righteousness, it may not be my job to extend an olive branch to those who voted for or voted in spite of racism and all manner of other oppressions. But I have to find a way eventually to feel comfortable tearing down the walls between us, as Traumer writes in her poem. James Baldwin, in that reading, wrote that we cannot break faith with one another. When we do, we stop holding each other, he says, and the seas engulf us and the light goes out. I don't have to be okay with what I know about 70 million people in this nation. In this moment, I don't have to forgive their position on democracy or on people of color or LGBTQ folks or women or those affected by poverty. They've broken faith with the common good. I've said for years that this is not a matter of partisanship or politics, but a matter of principles and values. This election has been unlike any other moment in American history. It transcends party. It's about fundamental orientation in the world and moral grounding. They've broken faith with our collective humanity, but I cannot break faith with our common humanity. Or then I'm the one denying the spark. I'm the one extinguishing the light and letting the sea rise up to engulf us. I have to be vigilant against that impulse in myself and vigilant against that impulse in others. Michael Beschloss last night paraphrased that oft attributed to Thomas Jefferson quote. It really originates with an Irishman named Curran, and it goes, "Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty." We must deeply understand what we have narrowly missed, and that the cliff is always right there. And we have to be honest about the state of our nation and our divisions. Vigilance is the responsibility that earns us our privileges of freedom. But generations of justice warriors and freedom seekers have so much to teach us. They teach us to tell the truth, acknowledge what is real, and to keep going. Their memories and legacies tell us to keep going on in spite of the hardship and the challenge. You recognize it, you own it, you grieve for it, you don't deny the moment we're in, but you find the celebrations wherever you can, and we don't stop hoping, visioning, and working. We honor our past, know the truth of our present, and then we step resolutely onto the road ahead. Let us recognize the grief and the worry that comes with knowing that we remain at a crossroads with a lot of work to do. Let us recognize with joy that in this moment, our vigilance and the voices and commitment of those that this country has rarely protected have protected us, democracy and freedom. And let us for today rejoice in the triumph of compassion and empathy, science and community. Let us cry tears of relief, let us celebrate, and let us sing.